So welcome to Lessons from Disaster Recovery, Building Effective Regulator Utility Partnerships. I'd like to start off by introducing our guest speakers. First up, we have Rick Moroz. Mr. Moroz has had a long and distinguished career in law, government, public service, and corporate governance. He's a founding member and managing director of Resolute Strategies, LLC, and a senior director of Archer Public Affairs based out of Trenton, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. He's a member of the U.S. Department of Energy Electric Advisory Committee and the EAC's subcommittees on smart grid development and defense critical infrastructure. He previously served as the board of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, the chairman of the Critical Infrastructure Committee for NARUC, or the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. He was also NARUC's liaison to the Electric Sector Coordinating Council and president of the Organization of PJM States. Mr. Moroz also serves as a senior advisor to Protect Our Power and a member of the advisory board of the ClearPath Foundation. Next up, we have Anthony Hurley. Anthony is a partner at the consulting firm Critical Preparedness, LLC, and an expert in the emergency and security management fields. He's also the Vanderbilt Group's collaborative partner for utility initiatives. We're very lucky to have him. As a consultant, his clients include critical infrastructure, government, and tribal authorities throughout the United States, Canada, the UK, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. His work has taken him to disaster sites around the world to address recovery efforts following 10 major hurricanes and countless floods, storms, and tornadoes. Prior to establishing his own firm, Mr. Moroz retired from his role as vice president of operations for Jersey Central Power and Light after 37 years of service. He's a former vice chair of the Infrastructure Advisory Committee for New Jersey's Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, and he served as the power restoration advisor to the governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Finally, we have the Vanderbilt Group's Liz McKay, our director of new initiatives and a grants oversight, regulatory, and compliance expert. Before joining the firm, Ms. McKay spent 10 years as the chief legal officer for New Jersey's Division for Disaster Recovery and Mitigation. During her career in state government, she managed compliance for more than $10 billion in federal disaster recovery funds, including relief aid for Hurricanes Sandy and Ida and American Rescue Plan Act funds. Prior to that, she was the deputy director for New Jersey's Department of Consumer Affairs and a policy advisor to the lieutenant governor and secretary of state. A graduate of the Columbia School of Law and a chartered financial analyst. In her former life, she was a federal prosecutor for the Eastern District of New York, a former Wall Street analyst, portfolio manager, and chief investment strategist for several major investment firms. I want to thank all of our speakers for being here this morning. We're very fortunate to have you and looking forward to a great presentation. With that, I will turn things over to Liz to walk us through our agenda and get us started. Liz, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. And good afternoon. Our topic today is building effective partnerships between regulators and utilities with lessons learned that you can apply as you implement the Department of Energy's grid infrastructure and resiliency programs. And after a brief refresher on the goals of the programs, our experts, Rick and Tony, will share their practical experience from the viewpoint of state regulator and investor-owned utility from their successful collaboration in the aftermath of 2 hurricanes. We'll hear how that collaboration strengthened recovery and mitigation efforts, and in fact was really critical to their success. And of course, collaboration is a requirement of these Department of Energy programs. I think that's why you'll find this discussion to be a valuable use of your time. Because remember, the acronym GRIP, the GRIP Awards, stands for Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships. So the government is putting it right out there. They're being quite explicit. They expect partnerships, they expect collaboration, because they expect results from these funds. And these partnerships, of course, may include partnerships that are outside your comfort zone. Whereas the insights from Rick and Tony are obviously directly applicable in a disaster recovery context, clearly the principles of that collaboration are relevant as you're executing these DOE programs. And they apply to electric cooperatives and technology companies, as well as investor-owned utilities or publicly traded utilities. And Rick and Tony will also highlight some of the mitigation measures that they deployed while in the recovery process. And again, I think these could be useful thoughts for your own projects. So before we turn to their discussion, I'll just take a few minutes to set the stage as to why their comments are so relevant to the grid infrastructure and resiliency programs. So if we take a step back and remind ourselves what the goals of the GRIP are, the first and foremost goal is to transform the U.S. grid for greater resiliency. Last year in 2023, there were 28 individual disasters, separate disasters, resulting from weather or climate that cost over $1 billion each in damages. So just stop for a minute and think about that. 28 events, so that's more than one every other week, that cost a minimum of $1 billion in damages. That's really staggering. And over 490 people lost their lives during these events. So there's no question why this goal is so important and why the government is really taking groundbreaking steps to try to address this problem. And I would say that providing grants to businesses is certainly groundbreaking for the federal government. The next goal is to prioritize energy justice, because we see over and over that the populations who can least afford the negative consequences of climate change, who don't have the mitigation measures that they need, they are the disadvantaged populations that are hurt the most by the negative consequences. And that's why 20% of your application score, 20% of your evaluation will depend on your community benefit plan. How does your project help disadvantaged populations? How extensive is your community engagement? And again, this will require collaboration or partnership with community organizations, labor unions, local governments, schools, even daycare centers potentially. So it's collaboration, it's a broad team all around. And then the third goal of the GRIP is to leverage private sector and non-federal capital for impactful technology and infrastructure deployment. So the government, again, needs that private investment, needs those private dollars, but I think it's more than just the capital investment. It's the intellectual capital, it's ideas. And I think that's why the government is emphasizing collaboration. We need to get as many ideas from as many sectors of this economy as we can. So what types of projects are eligible investments in these grid resiliency programs? And you can see in these examples, they vary pretty widely in terms of their cost and their complexity. Right? It can be things like vegetation management, removing trees, removing dead trees especially from power lines, right? Reconductoring, providing sensors or monitoring devices at substations as warning devices. And then, of course, microgrids and battery storage as subcomponents, so that in case there's a disruption to the grid, the power could flow independently, an island in effect. Then let's look specifically at the grid resilience utility and industry grants and who's eligible for those. The eligible entities, as you can see here, are pretty much private companies. These are businesses. These are businesses that directly receive funding from the government. So they're the direct beneficiaries in this program. Now let's look at the state and tribal formula grant program. So state tribal grants, these are governmental entities, and they're pass-through entities. And who are the sub-awardees? Who are they passing the money to? Well, this looks familiar because these are the direct beneficiaries under the Utility and Industry Grant Program. So the point here is that whether it's, again, within your comfort zone or not, as a state or government entity, you almost have to partner with these for-profit entities. And in terms of eligible projects, because this particular set of programs is really focused on mitigating weather or climate-induced disruptive events, it's a fairly narrow focus for these programs. What we saw in the prior slide are eligible projects. Now, remember, with these programs, you supplement existing efforts. So the construction of new power generation facilities, for example, would not be an eligible project for these programs. You have to supplement efforts that are already underway. And if you are a pass-through entity and you have experience with federal grants or you're familiar with the uniform guidance, it's supplemented now because we're dealing with for-profit entities. It's supplemented with a new set of rules in 2 CFR 910. And at Vanderbilt Group, we've done quite a bit of work with respect to the analysis in reviewing those sets of that new set of regulations. If we take a quick look at the Grid Innovation Program, the eligible entities here are mostly government entities, including local governments, and public utility commissions are called out. The funding opportunity announcement, or the FOA, for these programs states that the applicant must identify right up front, criteria number 1, the extent to which the project clearly enhances collaboration between eligible entities and owner-operators to demonstrate new approaches to enhance regional grid resilience. And because these are multiple territories or regional, these are typically large grant awards. They can be up to $1 billion. And if an application includes a public-private partnership, which pretty much that is the intent, that's almost the requirement here. Applications that do not demonstrate a meaningful level of collaboration will be rejected. So collaboration in name only will not cut it with the Department of Energy in these programs. And an example of an awarded project in this category is the collaboration between Portland General Electric and the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs in Oregon. And I think I mentioned this in a prior webinar. They have an agreement to increase transmission capacity to bridge the tribal nation, those lands east of the Cascade Mountains, with an abundance of renewable energy sources, with PGE's load center that's west of the Cascade Mountains and includes Portland, other cities on the Pacific. That way, the entire territory has access to renewable, affordable energy, and the tribal nation with a stake in this project will receive revenues. So we were providing revenues to a disadvantaged community by definition. And that project was awarded a grant of $250 million. And then the third program in the GRIP is the Smart Grid Grants. And this is the broadest category of eligible entities. It's for-profit, nonprofit, higher education, state and local governments, and tribal nations. But in this program also, more than any other, the focus is on technology. It's cutting edge technologies that can include new devices, new materials, engineering designs, software. And in fact, the DOE encourages the technology vendors to submit applications as the prime applicant, and then in collaboration with utility partners. And these smart grid technologies that are funded by this program also should have a pathway to wider applicability. And one of the awarded projects here is to Algonquin Power that will deploy Smart Valve, which is an advanced power flow control technology that could quickly solve grid issues by unlocking additional transfer capacity in the existing transmission lines. So this is with the existing infrastructure, again, taking on this, being able to transfer power, and that in turn enables the grid operator to quickly rebalance the electrical system and provide stability for the grid. And that was a $43 million project, as an example. So the Department of Energy encourages that applicant teams include this broad set of stakeholders, such as electric grid operators or owners, technology vendors, of course, system integrators, subject matter experts, local energy and environmental justice organizations, and community leaders, as well as state, tribal, territory, or regulatory stakeholders as appropriate. So bottom line, if you are receiving funding from the Department of Energy for the grid resiliency programs, you cannot avoid collaboration. So the Vanderweel Group is proud to have Rick and Tony here to answer, how can we best do this?
Very good. Thank you, Liz. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Hurricanes Irene and Sandy, and we're going to set the stage. We're going to talk a little bit about New Jersey. Rick's going to talk about the commission responsibilities, and then we're going to actually talk about the events. So New Jersey, 7,300 square miles, approximately 9.3 million residents, fifth smallest state based on land area, but 11th most populated state. When you take a look at over 1,260 people per square mile, it's the most densely populated state in the U.S. When you take when you really sit back and look at that, what does that really mean? That means in every square mile for that number of individuals, homes, apartments, businesses, the fact is that also increases the infrastructure per square mile. So or maybe where a event hit an area that wasn't so populated, you're not going to have as many substations. You're not going to have as much infrastructure there. So New Jersey is very densely populated, and over 90% of the population lives in what is considered an urban area. So we pulled this up from the National Risk Index. This is a FEMA index that takes a look at all the different counties, and you can see this heat map here where it talks about the hazards. So I don't know where everybody's at, but just take a look at your location versus New Jersey. During this event, Liz, Rick, and I, we were in New Jersey. When you take a look at it, it looks like an area that has a relatively low or very low probability of a natural risk. But again, we had back-to-back hurricanes in 2 straight years. But just take a look at the impact and potentially what your utility, the risk that you're going to have to decide how you're going to, or if you're going to submit mitigation, and also get into a collaborative effort with other entities. Rick?
Thanks, Tony. And great to be with the Vanderweel Group and everyone here, and with my friend Tony Hurley, who came in to do the response and recovery after Superstorm Sandy. And when I was president of the Board of Public Utilities, was able to work with Tony and the industry in this collaborative spirit that we're talking about today. So first, just an overview of the Board of Public Utilities, and then some discussion about how the storms impacted New Jersey and the response. The Board of Public Utilities is the Public Utility Commission for the state of New Jersey and is responsible for the safe and adequate, proper utility services at just and reasonable rates. It's the oversight, just as other public utility commissions are throughout the country. And it has the responsibility over the the non-public electric, gas, water companies, which is largely the investor owns. And it's responsible for dealing with customer complaints. But the Board of Public Utilities is also the state energy office for the state of New Jersey. Amongst other things, it plans for the future. But in this context, because of the responsibility to deal with the safe and adequate supply of utility, it has a response and recovery function, largely overseeing what is the ESF 12 or emergency services regarding the utility sector and response from an incident where there is an outage. And that's the core function that we are talking about today for the planning of the resilience of the grid, the response and recovery to a significant event. And that's what our experience was in New Jersey with Hurricane Irene and Superstorm Sandy. To give you the timeline, this was a confluence of events. In August of 2011, Hurricane Irene made landfall in New Jersey, and with significant outages, 1.9 million people. It took weeks for the recovery. And then there was a snowstorm on the heels of that in October of 2011. What happened as a result is the Board of Public Utilities retained a consultant to see how the companies and the utility companies were responding to this and the recovery efforts, the restoration efforts. What occurred after that was a report with 130 separate recommendations, everything from communications to planning to workforce development. And a final order was not implemented until early 2013. But what intervened in the meantime was Superstorm Sandy. Superstorm Sandy affected New Jersey and the Northeast with dramatic effects. 2.9 million customers were without power. And as you see here on the slide, 71% of the electric distribution system was disrupted. Water, wastewater, and communication systems, as well as the electric sector. 325,000 housing units were disrupted. Entire communities without service. And in a dramatic event, the decision was made to depressurize the entirety of gas distribution systems along the barrier islands in New Jersey, an unprecedented event. Restoration took weeks. So the Board of Public Utilities, looking at the restoration efforts, looking at what was needed, working with and discussing these issues in conjunction with the industry, made in that Hurricane Irene order and the subsequent Superstorm Sandy order a total of over almost 120 separate recommendations on how the industry should better prepare, should be more resilient with its operations. So Tony, maybe we'll turn it back to you just to talk about those key partnerships, how they worked, and an overview of the recommendations.
When you take a look at some of the key recommendations, some of those focused on preparedness, planning, pre-event communications, because one thing we heard loud and clear was just communicate and tell us what we can expect. This is information that individuals then can make life decisions. Vegetation management, damage assessment. It's ironic, but now that I've retired and now I work as a consultant, when I come in and do an after-action report, a lot of these appear in reports even that I generate to this day, talking about estimated times of restoration, being able to, again, let communities know when you're going to recover areas and communicate it at a granular level so that, let's say, instead of a water plant having to try to find a generator, when they know they're going to be back within 24 hours, then they don't have to do that. They may just wait until the power comes back on. So you also have to have accurate ETRs. Logistics, crew management is another big one, and also follow-up. One of the initiatives that we ended up dealing with is that after events, everything after Sandy and Irene, small or large, we would go to the communities and we would say, is there anything we need to do different? And then we would actually incorporate that inside of into some of our exercises. So it was a continuous learning process. I want to also talk about disaster preparation. When you talk about the planning aspect of it, the EDCs, the electric companies, we were asked to make sure that we design and practice storm events as if 75% of our customers were going to be out of power. And during Sandy, most utilities more than that. I know our utility more than 75% was impacted, but we learned to plan and actually practice for that 75% number. And what it certainly did is made us better when we got hit with smaller storms. Talk about activation, being able to develop a outage prediction model. What does that do for a utility? And then working with the public utility or the Board of Public Utilities to be able to say our forecast is that we're going to be out for X amount of days. And we know we have to bring in, 500 poles. We're going to ask for, maybe escorts from the state police to get those poles into the yards and unloaded. We look for those opportunities, and we look for that collaboration of reaching out and figuring out how we can make the process better, even prior to a storm, by working together and figuring out what we can do to help one another. Pre-event communications, again, we heard loud and clear. Individuals wanted to know the worst case scenario. They didn't want you to put a forecast out there, and then when that forecast, you can't meet it, put it out another couple of days, and then put it out another couple of days. We heard that loud and clear. What we heard is that go ahead and use your best estimate, the worst case scenario, and then if you have to pull it in, then we're, of course, going to be much more happier. But let us know so that we can basically execute all of our planning based on that. And then the last would be the post-event processes, being able to go back out to the stakeholders. And that also includes other utilities. One of the things I talked about on an earlier webinar is that working with the gas company, we found out that they have to restore their gas lines totally different if it's below freezing than they do if it's a warm summer day. And we had to alter our restoration practices based on that, simply because that the way we restored did not do them any good. And we wanted to restore together because it's about the community. It's about getting electric and gas into the communities in New Jersey so that, again, those communities can recover overall. Rick?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Another area that we focused on with the industry from the Board of Public Utilities was mitigation efforts, planning for being more resilient, in particular, substation flooding. It might seem obvious, but prior to these storms, there was very little planning that was done in collaboration between the commission and the industry. So one of the recommendations was to make these kinds of planning efforts to review jointly the efforts that the companies would undertake to identify those coastal flooding areas and look for the design of future resilient flood stabilization efforts. And I should mention, by extension, this effort has largely continued. That is the view between the industry and the commission to look at the planning of its capital investments that are necessary to make their systems more resilient. People talk all the time and tell me that the commissions across the country don't have the responsibility to do this, or the industry representatives say they're concerned about talking to their regulators. But as Liz mentioned earlier, the DOE grants encourage this. And this is exactly what we did in New Jersey, was that the commission staff was able to sit with the industry, identify where these needs were to be more resilient, and then put in place planning efforts to ensure substation flooding could be avoided. We also took very strong efforts around vegetation management. And Liz mentioned this earlier. This is a specific effort that's called out in the grant process. We identified locations rights of way that were in or out of the jurisdiction of the companies. And the board actively worked on these efforts with the companies. Damage assessment efforts was another area to develop technologies to better identify and process damage assessment numbers so that the board and the industry would have better use of technology in these areas. And circuit outages, looking at, with the board and the industry, how distribution automation could more effectively plan and respond when there were outages to reroute power. And to this day, those efforts continue in New Jersey between the board and the industry to implement those technologies and make the systems more resilient. Tony?
Talk about cooperation during a crisis, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a couple of processes. Just as an example, the power of collaboration. One of the things that everybody knows New Jersey for is that you can't pump your own fuel, and that also includes whenever you have a storm. So if you have a staging site, you cannot go and fuel your trucks. You got to go to a gas station. And when we brought this up to the commission, the regulatory commission, they started working with state regulators, state legislation on our behalf. And basically what they did is they had the rule change so that if an emergency is identified, proclaimed in the state, utilities are allowed to do emergency fueling. That's the impact of collaboration. If we would have tried to embark on that road by ourselves, we would not have been successful. But one of the other areas that we talked about was estimated times of restoration. We heard loud and clear from the individuals that were in the focus groups and the commission that within 24 hours, they wanted the global ETR. When were we going to be recovered? And it turned out to be a little bit simpler than we originally thought, simply because there was so much data out there that we knew that a storm that hit with so much ice or so much wind, we had already experienced 5, 6, 10 of those events. We had a pretty good idea of how long it was going to take us to recover. So in that case, what happened is that we were able to give those global ETRs, and then we worked with the commission. What I really appreciated when I talk about collaboration, and I've spoke to this, is that when we put that out there, it was accepted. It wasn't a bunch of pressure. Look, you're going to have to cut it back, because if you do that, then it's just not going to be an accurate ETR. We did the best we could. We identified those estimated restoration times, and it was supported by the commission, and they helped communicate that, and they helped other individuals use that information to plan. So very effective. Logistics and field support. We were asked to predetermine staging sites. This is something I work with utilities today on, where you go out in advance and identify staging sites. You get them under contract. You talk about, the liability and the access and what happens if you damage the grounds. You get all that done in advance. You would take those specific locations and pre-design them. If you know that the area is large enough to park 200 vehicles, and bring in staging and tents to be able to house 500 people, you design in advance so that all you have to do is activate, give the design to a staging site vendor, and have them build it. And we had 12 locations across the state of New Jersey. And again, we work with utilities to this day where we talk to them and say, take the initiative to do that in advance, because it accelerates your ability to respond. Crew workforce management. Being able to identify who's working where, but also an education process. One of the things we heard a lot about from community leaders was that you seemed like everybody was working down the street in this other community, but nobody was in our community. So we started educating them that the reason they were in other communities, that's where the substation is. And as soon as they worked and got that substation energized, the other community also became energized. So we started educating. And once we started educating, we found out that it was cascading. Those individuals continued to educate. And then they would put it on websites, and they would talk about it at council meetings. So what we did is that we found out that there was many less complaints regarding where we were working, as long as we were saying, we've got 1,000 individuals out there working on this particular ship, restoring power. Rick?
As we said, we've learned many lessons from our experiences in Irene and Sandy, but the most particular one was that the industry and the regulators should sit down and plan out their efforts for resilience. So what worked? We had many meetings between the staff of the commission and the utilities with regular updates. And the electric companies even shared with each other their progress and solutions. We at the commission reached out to other states and other utility commissions to share what we were doing and elicit from them what was working in their states. And we designated clear delineations of the points of contact between the board and with the industry. And oftentimes we'd be out in the field, something that hadn't really been done before, to see how operations unfolded and for BPU staff to hear firsthand from the industry on how those operations would unfold during a crisis. The process also was driven by public hearings. The board elicited public commentary, as well as particularly involving municipal officials who oftentimes in an emergency situation are really on the front lines looking for information and for collaboration with them between their state and even federal partners. And as I have already said, the board staff engaged comprehensively with all the electric distribution companies, as well as the water and gas companies and telecommunications companies in a comprehensive effort. And the board used consultants to advise on the emerging technologies or communications efforts or other operations that were best practices that could be employed. And as we signaled earlier, one of the matters that has become an enduring effort is that between the board and the industry, we have encouraged in New Jersey the continued investment in hardening of their systems and upgrades for resilience. PSE&G with its Energy Strong program, the gas companies, in particular New Jersey Natural Gas with its infrastructure program, and JCP&L through its efforts in its rate cases to identify specific infrastructure capital investments. And at the end of my tenure, we even adopted a rule that specifically permits and encourages the companies to make infrastructure filings that endure to this day to continue to harden the utility systems in New Jersey. Tony?
So when you take a look at the takeaways, I just want to, again, reiterate what Mr. Morose was stating about the cooperation. I remember walking into the Board of Public Utilities building with other utilities that I hadn't even met previous, and I had already been there, a couple of years, and being able to work with them on identifying best practices, pilots that their company had experienced, even to the point where we realized that maybe we needed to go and visit other utilities that had best practices, which I think I visited 3 or 4 prior to us embarking on this. So we were looking for those opportunities. The collaboration, continued, and it was with a lot of different organizations. I remember working with a number of federal agencies in regards to some of the information at the government labs that they had been working on, and they shared that information. Tabletop exercises. To this day, I've been in the industry for 43 years. And while in New Jersey, I took part in the largest tabletop exercise that I've ever sat in a chair and participated in, with over 100 different agencies represented. The government came in, federal government came in, and they coordinated it. We were part of the planning team, but it turned out to be phenomenal. We walked around away from there just having binders full of lessons learned that we went back and improved our own processes. And then as we worked on this, you find out that now, cybersecurity comes along and you're already working. And I remember that the board asked us, how would all the utilities like to get together and talk about cyber security? Well, the same individuals have been working on all these projects. We all got together. We called the FBI in, Department of Homeland Security, the Board of Public Utility. We were so used to working together. And I remember again when the Super Bowl came up to the Meadowlands, it was the same individuals. We just got so used to working together that we realized that it was the most effective way to achieve everything that we were really faced with. Other takeaways is that, when I take a look at the next slide, is that the blame game and excuses and conflict serves nobody. Pointing fingers and going into this, trying to come up with good excuses is just counterproductive. After Sandy, I could tell you that I was very comfortable calling the commission, calling Mr. Morose, some of his staff, and saying, "Look, we went through this event. I don't think we handled this well, but I wanted to tell you what we're doing to work on it." And instead of, the finger pointing and them jumping all over it, they worked with us. How much time do you think you're going to need? Can we offer any support? It just became so commonplace that we all became comfortable with it. And I traveled, West Coast and to the South and throughout the Midwest. And I've talked about some of these experiences, and I can tell in the faces that this is something that maybe isn't as popular in some of the other areas, but I can tell you we never could have been successful without having that level of collaboration. So, Liz?
Thank you, Tony and Rick. That was absolutely terrific. And I think there's no question that you would not have been able to accomplish what you did without collaboration across the board with a variety of partners. So let's see, why is collaboration important? Well, it's required. It's required by the Department of Energy. And I think one of the takeaways from our discussion with Rick and Tony was formalize your collaboration. Have set meetings, have regular meetings. And again, this is something that you have to show the Department of Energy you're doing, but for the success of the project, formalize your agreement. This collaboration increases capacity for large-scale projects like the Grid Innovation Program, where the Department of Energy wants the larger scale regional solutions. How could PG&E have established this renewable energy project, gotten the renewable energy to the areas where it needed it, with the more populous areas, if it hadn't been able to reach an agreement with the tribal nation that had access to the renewable energy? Access to more resources, financial and intellectual resources, and increasing the likelihood of project success. And I think another great example in this presentation, you have a regulation that's hampering your effort, and you're seeking some kind of a waiver. Your odds of success in that endeavor are much greater if you have an entity working on the inside the government, trying to obtain that waiver or trying to help you out with that regulation. And then vital stakeholder input and buy-in, absolutely so important here. Input from communities who are on the ground, who have an important perspective. Again, you heard from Rick and Tony. There were hearings, soliciting feedback, and education. Right, the people in the town are annoyed. Why am we not seeing any workers here? Because that's not the source of the problem. It's not in your town. It's 2 towns over. So educating, because if you don't have the community buy-in, I think it's very difficult to have a successful project. Okay, and we'd be almost remiss if we didn't touch briefly on risk factors, because you have exerted tremendous effort if you have obtained one of these awards. It's your plan, it's your concept paper, it's your application, but you also need to be diligent to keep the money. And it's rare, but it is not unheard of, that the federal government could demand return of the funds. And that's what deobligation refers to. And I'm talking about the obligation outside of something like fraud, which is obviously a reason to have the funds returned. But you must comply with program requirements. It sounds obvious, but that's what you must do. That to preclude the most basic risk of deobligation, follow the program requirements. And again, in this case, it requires collaboration. not collaboration in name, but collaboration in reality. You also can be penalized for not spending funds in a timely fashion. And with the 5-year period of performance for these awards, that sounds like a no-brainer. Of course, we'll be done in 5 years. But if you have multiple territories, multiple jurisdictions involved in your project, each having its own set of requirements and its own set of priorities, it is very easy to get bogged down in administrative matters before the shovel is even close to the ground. We also have, for these programs, you have to abide by NEPA. So that's the National Environmental Protection Act. And with environmental reviews, again, for particularly broad territories, you can wait a year or more for proper permitting. That's not unusual. And it's not factoring in local requirements. So the DOE has recognized this, and the proposal, they offered up a proposal, the comment period closed, I believe, at the end of October, to try to streamline this process and have more of a one-stop shop approach. But safe to say, getting the required permits chews up a lot of time. And then finally, what I saw during Hurricane Sandy regarding deobligation is non-compliance with the uniform guidance. And for these particular programs, non-compliance also with 2 CFR 910. You must comply with the basic federal regulations. Now, the Vanderweel Group is in business to keep you out of trouble. And whether it's monitoring your subrecipients or your subawardees, as the Department of Energy calls it, and by the way, you are obligated to do this according to the uniform guidance if you are a pass-through entity. So whether Vanderweel is monitoring your subawardees or helping you to set up your own monitoring plan, monitoring program, so that you can do this yourself, or if you are new to the world of federal regulation, federal grants, like the for-profit entities, if you're not certain how to proceed, and you don't want to set things up so that you're non-compliant at some point down the road, you need to set things up properly, we can help. I think, and I would hope, that you found today's discussion to be a valuable use of your time and that you walk away with information you can use. We are practitioner-driven and have experts like Rick and Tony on our team who are willing to lend their expertise, developed through their experience. So a huge thank you to Rick and Tony for a fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, and do we have some time for questions, Jillian?
We do, and I have 2 right here. So this first one is aimed at Rick and Tony, I think, and it says that regulators and utilities are often reluctant to work with one another. Why do you think that is, and what are some of the things that you can do to overcome those hurdles?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. And as I suggested earlier, there are oftentimes regulators are being very deferential. They consider their job to be one which is more judicial in terms of matters that come in front of them rather than being proactive. I encourage my former colleagues, my friends who are on public utility commissions and their staffs across the country to be more proactive with the industry for the reasons and the experiences we discussed today. In my experience, it's needed. It's needed to have that collaboration and anticipate the needs of the industry. It can be done, and there's often just a reluctance to do it. But I would also say that the industry and the regulators have to want to do that. And I'll turn this over to Tony to give you some perspective from the industry point of view.
Yeah, it just takes the first time where you collaborate and then you wait for the results. So then when you see that the results are genuine and that they're result are better than you could have done on your own, then you're willing to take the next step and try it again and then again. And then what happens is that you just get that constant collaborative efforts between two organizations. And Mr. Moroz was talking about the field visits. What happened is through this process, it wasn't unusual that we would get a call from the staff to say, can we go in the field with some of your staff and just see what they do to maintain a piece of equipment? And then all of a sudden there was interest. It wasn't that every time we got together, it had to be adversarial. It was now collaborative. And then it just, again, we would get through storms and we would get together and we weren't even told to do it. We get together and we would look at what we could have done to improve. So it just takes the first step.
And I would say that given the requirements of the grant programs, an applicant should be comfortable in making the approach. For example, if they are an industry representative, an IOU or a public power or other agency, to make the approach to the regulator or the policymaker, the decision maker as needed to start this conversation, because as Liz has pointed out, it's a requirement of the grant.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Liz, we've got two more, and I think these are more for you. So one is about administrative costs. Is there an allotment in the grant funding for administrative expenses?
Well, for the answer is that depends. For the government entities, for example, in the state and tribal formula grants, there's a 5% allocation permitted for administrative costs. But keep in mind, when you're dealing with for-profit entities, which again is really a very new endeavor on the part of the federal government, the government has to be very careful not to create the impression, or certainly the reality, that they are giving a windfall to shareholders, to the owners of these utilities or technology companies. So that's why with these programs, you have very high matching fund obligations for the for-profit entities, and that's why there is no allocation for administrative costs.
And then the last one is about, I think this is in reference to some of those planning and potentially tabletop exercises that Rick and Tony talked about. Is there an allocation in any of the GRIP programs that would cover those sorts of, kind of thought exercises or less immediately logistics-based planning activities?
Yes, I would say that. I would think that in the Grid Innovation Program, some of the smart grid grants, yes, that planning would certainly be covered in terms of the grant eligibility.
Right. Well, those were all of the questions we had. Thank you again to our speakers for a phenomenal presentation. Thank you to our audience for being here today. We are going to continue releasing new resources about the Department of Energy grid grant programs moving forward. So please keep an eye on our social media accounts and on our website for continuing updates there. You can also, again, sign up for email updates using the link in the chat box, which, among other things, will include invitations to future webinars. And if you have any questions following today's presentation, we've included Liz's email here on the screen for you. It'll be on the copy of the PowerPoint presentation that you should all be getting in your email later this week, or you can give us a call, and we're happy to help at any time. With that, I will say again, thank you to everyone for a wonderful afternoon. Have a great rest of your day and a great week.